Welcome to Turn the Page, the official podcast of the Syosset Public Library.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Turn the Page. I'm your host Jen, and I am joined by the author of a rom-com that was so delightful. It touched on many of my teen interests, many of my grown-up interests, and it is just so much fun. So let's get into it. Hello, welcome. Could I ask you to introduce yourself and your book, please?
Of course. I'm Mallory Marlowe. I am the author of the upcoming rom-com Love and Other Conspiracies. It is a rom-com about a producer who is very skeptical and ends up teamed up with a paranormal conspiracy theorist to make a web series.
It's so much fun, and I think, if this rom-com had been dropped in my lap when I was like a teen myself, I think I would have been reading rom-coms so much earlier than I actually was. It is so much fun and so deeply funny. Like the writing is like, oh, it's so funny. But before I start to gush too much, I would love if you could tell us a little bit about your career and your journey to this book. I know you also have worked in writing video games, and I'm curious about how that has influenced your style, your approach to writing.
Yeah, so I mean, I've been writing books since I was like in middle school. So it's been a while, and I was just churning them out in high school, and I wish I had the time to do that now as an adult. But then I went to school and studied screenwriting. So my background was in film and the entertainment industry, and I did that for a couple of years when I first moved out to LA. And then I ended up working at a game studio, and now I work as a writer for them for the past year or so. And I think that I was kind of doing both screenwriting, game writing, everything else at the same time as I was sort of finding my strengths as a prose writer and writing novels. And so I think that they kind of help each other in some ways. Like I take the skills that I know from writing screenplays and games to how I write a book. And I think that I always am picturing something in my head, how it would look visually. So that definitely is a big contributor. But I think that especially writing romance is really interesting to bring over into the game sphere because you have games where you can romance characters and whatnot and stuff. But it gives you a really good insight into characters and their wounds and what they need to overcome. So I definitely think that they go hand in hand. And it was also nice, I've been a nerd and a gamer my whole life, so it was kind of fun to write a character like Hayden who is just really nerdy. I got to kind of bring myself into him and be like, well, he would totally be into that, and get to throw in my little snippets there here and there.
I love Hayden so much. He's phenomenal. And it's funny because usually I ask about the point of view protagonist first. I'm so down to talk about Hayden first. So let's talk a little bit about where he comes from. And my corollary is, on a scale of 1 to 10, how much should I be imagining him as looking like Fox Mulder?
Well, I mean, to start, I think that if you were to ask Hayden how much he wants to be seen as Fox Mulder, it'd be like a 10. I think that if it were up to him, it'd be pretty high. But he initially came from a screenplay I wrote in college, and he was kind of the same character. It didn't end up going anywhere. It was just something for a class. But he was this kind of weird, quirky conspiracy theorist, kind of looked the same, the glasses and the, kind of messy hair and really tall and lanky. When that project panned out, I was like, I'm going to do something with this character one day. He's gonna, he's too much fun to write to not have him go somewhere. And so then as I was gearing up to write this book for NaNoWriMo in 2020, this idea just kind of came back to me, and I was like, oh, well, we're obviously going to use Hayden. And he was just a really fun character to write because not only is he very weird and out of the box, but he's also so deeply caring. And so I think that he's open-minded in almost a childlike way where he wants to believe in all this stuff. He wants to know all the cool things that are out there. So he has a very childlike curiosity. And then he also is just really weird. So it's a delight to write him every time because you just kind of never really know what he's gonna say or do.
Oh, yeah, he's so sweet. And, he is very, yeah, he's got like some quirks
Yeah.
and, but they're all very like sweet and sincere. And something that I really like appreciate about it is that like, some rom-coms have to like manufacture one of the characters doing something kind of terrible to the other in order to
Yeah.
break them apart for a while so that they can come back together. And that
Mhm.
doesn't really happen here. Like both of
Yeah.
our participants in this romance are doing their best and are good people who are
Yeah.
striving. And so like the tension doesn't come from like, why did this person do this terrible thing? It just comes from like
Yeah.
communication works. So
Yeah, totally. And I mean, that was something that I always struggled with. Like, I was trying to write this book into that formula of like, there's a third act breakup. They have to do something that's going to tear them apart. And every time I did that, it just wasn't working. And my editor so brilliantly recommended, like, they wouldn't have a third act breakup. They wouldn't do this to each other. And so then that the conflict comes from somewhere else. And it's more of a push on Hallie than it is the two of them together. And I really like the fact that he gives her time to, work through what she has to work through. And yeah, their communication is something that was really, really critical for me when I was writing it.
mm. Yeah, it is really fun and refreshing, I think, to see like healthy communication in rom.
Yeah.
Again, like, yeah, there's so much usually like misunderstanding or hurt
Mhm.
feelings. And this is just like, yeah, two people who are like pretty good at communicating.
Yeah.
So I'd love to talk about Hallie too.
Yeah.
She's so wonderful. And she's bringing a lot of both hope and some like
Mhm.
hurt
Yeah.
into like the beginning of this relationship. So I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about crafting her and
Mhm.
sort of like your nuanced take on her like her previous trauma and how it affects like
Yeah.
how she moves now.
Yeah, I think that Hallie is somebody, and this kind of happened accidentally in that like metaphor of like believing in cryptids and ghosts and stuff as a, as a vector for believing in yourself. So I think that she's somebody who really kind of needed that hope, and she has it, but she doesn't know how to grab onto it. And so I think that Hayden is a great person for her to find because he is so whimsical. He does believe in these things that he doesn't understand, and it kind of leads her to believe in herself too, especially when you kind of like she's somebody who has that deep down. She does believe in herself and she knows her skills, but she's just been with somebody for so long who has made her feel like she doesn't have those things. And I mean, I think that we've all had those people in our lives who just bring us down and don't want us to shine. And so for me, it was like a job in particular, not quite a boyfriend, but like a job that, really kind of dulled my shine. And so as I was writing this book, I was like reaching for that part of me that was like, no, I have these skills. I have these good traits. Like, how can we overcome this? And what's a good vehicle for Hallie to learn those things? And I just so happen to be aliens.
Which, oh my gosh, it's so great. Like it all like I mentioned Fox Mulder in passing, but I
Yeah.
feel like you know, the like that's where I got my love of the supernatural. Like I
Yeah.
was raised in the 90s and I
Hmm.
also loved cryptids and aliens, ghosts, and all these things. And so it just felt like so much like these characters like grew up in the same milieu that I did.
Yes.
Uh, I'm so curious about like your supernatural research because you mentioned
Oh
like a
boy.
whole bunch of like super interesting like phenomena and cases that even like I had never heard of. So like that must have been really fun. Like what was that like?
Yeah, I mean, I'm like you in that I grew up like watching like I watched all of the like History Channel, Travel Channel, I forget which, network they were all airing, probably all of them. But like the paranormal caught on camera or like the ghost hunting shows, like there was one show on I think like the Discovery Kids network that was like aimed at kids, and that was where I learned about like Mothman and Bigfoot and all the Chupacabra, all these creatures and stuff, and it just like it was like a bug bit me. And I've always just had that interest. And so every city I go to I try and do a ghost tour if it's like haunted. If it's not really that spooky, I probably won't. But yeah, and so I mean I just like going down those rabbit holes, and like even I think without having a book to work on, I'm kind of always looking to learn something new and odd. So like I could spend hours watching like video essays on like, here's all of the proof of this creature, or here's, you know, the best alien footage ever captured. So I think a lot of it I kind of like had in my head and then was like fact checking myself as I wrote it to make sure I wasn't doing, you know, saying something that was incorrect. But I mean, I think the fun with like the conspiracy theories aspect is that some of them are just so out there that you can have fun. Like, it's really fun. It's really fun for Hayden to be like, well, what if it was this? Like, what if it was that? And Hallie is like, dude, what are you talking about? So you can kind of stretch the bounds of like what's actually feasible with him.
My favorite is his observation that all hotels have lemon verbena. I was like, that's kind of true, actually. I've seen a lot of lemon verbena out there. So.
I think it's changing now, though, because like that was something I noticed. I was like, oh, it's a hotel. It's going to have lemon verbena shampoo and conditioner. But now I think they are starting to branch out. But like all of my friends who have read the book, every time they see something lemon verbena, they're just sending me pictures. I'm like, I'm so glad that his legacy lives on like this in hotel shampoo bottles.
Oh, absolutely. No one's ever going to like think of lemon verbena again outside of this context. So that's so
no, that's my hope.
I think you're absolutely right, like about the other sort of like shows that sort of spurred the interest because yeah, like for me, like watching Ghost Adventures in a hotel is such a like a necessary component of travel. I'm like staying in other places.
Totally.
Yeah, like it's so on in every hotel room and it's great.
Yeah.
I'd love if we could talk a little bit about their on-screen dynamic
Yeah.
because they're working on the show together that Hallie is sort of like has accidentally ended up like co-starring in, which is really fun. And they have like a really like playfully combative like relationship that probably makes for great watching.
Mhm.
But I love if you could talk a little bit about like how you see their on-screen dynamic working with their off-screen dynamic.
Yeah, I mean, I think that they're both probably a little bit more playful on camera than they are off because you know they're putting on a show. I think that like they both know how to create entertainment. So I do think that they're probably a little bit more sparry and coherent on camera than they are when they're just hanging out in Hayden's living room. But I definitely feel like I watched a lot of BuzzFeed Unsolved like during its era when it was on, and like I still watch Ghost Files and Mystery Files, and so like I think between that and like the Scully Mulder skeptic and believer dynamic, I kind of was able to find their voices. Like I definitely didn't want to copy either or like, you know, rip off BuzzFeed Unsolved in any way, but I did really like I think that show really captures how millennials like weird millennials will respond on camera to these, you know, circumstances that they're on totally opposite sides of the spectrum on. So I think that helped a lot with like the speed and the banter, but you know, once you kind of get in the rhythm, the two of them just kind of started talking to me, and their scenes, like especially the first hotel scene when they're at the Roosevelt, is one of my favorite scenes. That they're just so unhinged.
They are, my gosh, it's so much fun. And, you know, I'd love if we could talk a little bit too about like how you craft romantic tension. Because something that I tend to ask romance writers about, because I'm super interested in it, is that like you always have like two sets of forces, and one force is like drawing them together and one is pushing them apart, you know, and sort of like creating the tension. So how do you manage that tension? Like how do you keep things in that like, you know, middle zone where it could still kind of go either way for a long time and, you know, tease the reader along that way?
Yeah, I mean, that is always every single book I write, that is always one of the hardest parts. And I think that a lot of authors struggle with that too, because like you hit a point where you're like, I just want them to kiss. Like, I don't want to keep them away. I just want them to kiss. I mean, I think that for Hallie in particular, since this is told solely from her perspective, for her, it's a fear. It's like, I've fallen for somebody before and it ended up biting me so badly that like I don't even know who I am anymore. I'm really struggling to find my footing as a person. And so I think that for her, she tends to pull away because she doesn't know if she can trust Hayden. She doesn't know if she can trust anybody. It's not really about him. And I think that for Hayden, he was somebody who struggled to open up for a while because he was so used to, you know, being on his own and taking care of his, you know, his dad as he was ill. And so I think that through watching him open up and be able to share vulnerable parts of himself that he's not comfortable with, Hallie kind of learns that he's also a trustworthy person. But I do think that like a character like Cade, her ex, is kind of always in the back of her head, like, as much as I want this, I'm so scared to do it. And I think that just fleshing out like a really solid wound for your characters does make it a lot easier to have them convince themselves not to do something. And I think that we as people do that too. When you start feeling feelings for somebody, you're like, well, how could this go wrong? Or, you know, how is this going to end up like the last one? So I think that just keeping those things really at like the top of your character's mind will kind of pull them apart, but you're also having so much fun pushing them together and like doing things like putting them in a car together for several hours, or having to stay in a hotel room where there's only one bed, which is one of my favorite tropes. So things that make it so hard to avoid being around this person, and where you're like, oh, I'm gonna have to give into these feelings eventually, aren't I?
Yeah, and it's like it's kind of a really efficient move because it like it creates the tension between them, and it gives her a lot of space to grow as a character too.
Yeah.
And that's something that I think about a lot actually as I was reading this book and sort of other romances written like in sort of like the generation of writers that we're existing in right now.
Yeah.
I feel like a lot more romances sort of get into like the parental dynamics that often like shape how characters approach romance and attachment and like all those like big
Yeah.
psychological things.
Yeah.
So yeah, could you talk a little bit about like the role of parents in this, especially for Hayden, because he's bringing
Yeah.
kind of baggage from that.
Yeah, so Hallie's parents are not so much part of it. They're pretty tame and kind of doing their own thing, but Hayden's parents are a really important aspect of his character. For, you know, a couple of reasons. One, his father was a famous horror writer, so he was kind of like a Stephen King type figure. And so that really gave him this sense of wonder, and like he talks about going on monster hunts with his dad and how they had a really special relationship where he felt really celebrated in like all the weird things that he liked, and that was his person who just got him and kind of made him into who he was. Well, on the other hand, his mother is a little bit more like, you're really going to be hunting Bigfoot, like that's what you want to do for a job. And I think that, you know, I'm really lucky I have fantastic parents, but I did come from like a background where you kind of just did the normal thing. You didn't really branch out and do your, you know, average job. My parents were always really supportive, but like it was still weird. I, you know, had guidance counselors and friends' parents who were like, you're going to go into writing? Really? Like, why don't you just like go to business school or something? And so I think that, you know, your parents in a way are looking out for you and wanting you to be secure and safe. And I think that that's really where a lot of her concerns come from. But it is also like, I get where she's coming from. It is a little weird to explain to your friends, like, yeah, he has a podcast where he like talks about the JFK assassination. Like it's unconventional. And so I think that sometimes parents don't know how to explain that. But I mean, in this ever-changing media landscape, people are able to make a lot of money doing that kind of thing. So it's a different era. And so I think that one of the things I wanted to do was show him kind of healing and closing that gap with her, because that's important. I think him having a, you know, a good relationship with his father is important, but having a healing relationship with his mom is also really important.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it sets up the characters on an arc together, and like they each have like a little bit of a solo arc that they need to fulfill in order to get themselves to the place where they can really see each other, which is lovely. And I guess that's how people work in real life, you know?
Yeah, totally.
Yeah. I do really like what you said about like sort of how we are living in a changing world. And it reminded me that like a lot of this kind of takes place in and satirizes like millennial startup culture. Like the company that Hallie works for is like kind of silly, but like also sounds really cool and exciting. And I just love the detail that they have like conference rooms named after memes, like Success Kid Room or like Sad Kid Room. So can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah. So, I mean, I work in entertainment, and I just think there's something about like corporate companies where like it's a little cringe. Like they're trying really hard to be cool and trendy, and that's why they have like beer in the fridges, or like catered lunch Fridays, or unlimited PTO, which is like kind of a scam sometimes. So I think that it was like that's exactly the type of company that would be producing this type of show and this type of content is it's trying to be hip, but it's trying to be cool. And, these, people who are older, like the kids love memes. So we're going to name all the conference rooms after memes. And then the workers probably aren't thinking anything of it. Like it's just, you're just going from place to place kind of. So, I mean, it was really fun to kind of include those corporate gaffes that they're always pulling and whatnot. I had a friend at the time who was working at a very similar type company, and some of the stuff she would say, they're like, oh, write that down. Like that's kind of weird. I want to keep that. So it's fun. I think that some people will probably be like, this is too dated in, this current timeline, but I feel like we all kind of are familiar with those companies. So I was like, you know what? That's where Hallie works. That's exactly the type of place that would be doing this. And I got to, you got to be realistic with that.
Absolutely. And I think it makes sense that like a big corporation would have like out of date memes too, right?
Oh,
Because
yeah.
they're not like on the cutting edge of this. There's definitely like a feeling of like a, hello, fellow students to it,
Yeah,
like,
yes. How do you do, fellow kids?
Yeah.
That's very much so how it is.
So I wanted to get back to the supernatural research a little bit. Good. Do you have a particular favorite cryptid or phenomenon that you were like, this has to be included in the book as something like Hayden researched?
Yeah, I mean, I'm a big aliens person, so like I love the idea of having them go to Area 51 and like try not to get arrested. I think so. So I knew I had to include a lot of aliens, and I think that Hayden is also somebody who like he would tend to resort to aliens as like, well, it could have been. So I definitely tried to work those in as much as possible. But I also love Mothman. I just think he's like, I remember learning about Mothman when I was a kid, and then I was like kind of freaked out. I was like, oh my God, this guy shows up and like a bridge collapses. Like that's terrifying. But now he's kind of like transformed into a really lovable cryptid. Like he's always getting the cute fan art treatment, and the joke is that like he has like a great ripped body because there's that one statue where he's just absolutely shredded for no reason. So I think that like the memification of Mothman was like, I gotta get all that in there because he's probably my favorite cryptid. He's just real fun.
He is really fun. He's got a great design. Like
yeah, great vibe, really good energy.
Yeah. If I had to have a drink with a cryptid, it would be Mothman.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good pick, actually.
Oh man, yeah, this book is so much fun, and I'm really appreciative that you came to talk about it with us and our listeners, and I am very excited to recommend it to people.
Thank you. No, I was so happy to be here. This was such a fun conversation.
Thank you. Are you working on anything else at the moment? What's on your horizon?
Yeah, so there will be a second book that comes out likely next summer, and it is set within the same universe as Love and Other Conspiracies, but it takes on different characters, and it I think leans even further into the X-Files aspect. It's really a fun book. I can't wait to talk more about it. It's some of the most fun I've ever had writing a story. So it's a little out there and a little, little zany. So I'm so excited for people to, get their hands on that too.
Nice. Okay, well, I hope you don't mind then if I like, throw another email to your publicist.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, because that was the perfect pitch for me. I'm like, yep.
Yeah, more X-Files.
Yeah. Well, thank you again. This has been really delightful.
Thank you too. This is awesome.
Thanks. Okay, listeners, it's your turn. Please go check out Love and Other Conspiracies. By the time that you hear this, it will be out in the world. So please go to your favorite independent bookstore or library or like Mutual UFO Network outpost.
Good call out. Yeah.
Thank you. All right. Okay. Goodbye, listeners. It is time to close this chapter.
It's time to close this chapter of Turn the Page. Join us for the next episode.